The moment it happened, nobody in the stadium could believe what they had just heard. It wasn't a hit. It wasn't a pitch. It wasn't even a play on the field. It came from inside the dugout. A single comment that cut through the noise of the game like a blade, instantly shifting the entire atmosphere from competitive baseball to something far more uncomfortable, far more serious, and far more explosive. Shohei Ohtani stood near the on-deck circle when it happened, and for a brief second, even paused. Not because of fear. Not because of pain. But because of disbelief. What was said didn't belong in baseball. And within seconds, it became clear that this moment would not just stay in the game, it would travel far beyond it, straight into controversy, outrage, and disciplinary action. The Dodgers-Rockies matchup had already carried tension before the first pitch was thrown. Anytime Shohei Ohtani steps onto the field, the energy changes. Fans arrive early. Cameras focus tighter. Opposing pitchers adjust their game plans. Opposing dugouts feel the pressure in ways that are hard to explain. But this night felt different. There was an edge in the air, a quiet intensity that suggested emotions could spill over at any moment. And once the game began, it didn't take long for that prediction to become reality. Ohtani had been locked in from the start. Every movement was controlled. Every at-bat carried that familiar sense of anticipation that follows him everywhere he goes. Even when he wasn't swinging, he influenced the game. Pitchers rushed. Catchers overthought. Managers adjusted positioning constantly. That's the effect of a player who doesn't just play baseball, but bends the entire structure of it. But in the middle of all that competitive tension, something happened off the field that no one expected. It started as a normal exchange in the Rockies dugout. Players were talking, coaches were discussing adjustments, the usual flow of a long game. The stadium noise covered most of it. But then, in a moment that seemed to cut through everything, a voice rose higher than it should have. A comment directed toward Ohtani. Not about strategy. Not about pitching. Not about the game. Something personal. Something offensive. Something that immediately changed the energy in the stadium the moment nearby players heard it. At first, there was confusion. People didn't fully process what was said. Even Ohtani's teammates on the field looked toward the dugout, trying to understand what had triggered the sudden shift in emotion. But within seconds, it became clear that this wasn't just frustration or trash talk. It crossed a line that baseball has always claimed it would never tolerate. The Dodgers dugout reacted instantly. Players stepped forward. Coaches raised their voices. The air tightened as both sides began to converge toward the warning track area. Umpires rushed in, trying to separate the tension before it could escalate further. The Rockies dugout, meanwhile, turned chaotic. Coaches attempted to calm the situation, but the damage had already been done. The words had already been spoken. And in professional sports, once something like that happens, there is no taking it back. Ohtani himself didn't react the way many expected. There was no immediate explosion. No aggressive confrontation. Instead, he stood still for a moment, looking toward the dugout with a calm expression that made the situation even more powerful. Because silence in moments like this says more than anger ever could. His teammates, however, were not as restrained. Several Dodgers players looked ready to sprint across the field. The emotion was raw. The sense of disrespect was undeniable. The umpires quickly gathered with both managers. Conversations became heated. Gestures became sharper. And then came the moment that shifted everything again. After a brief discussion, the umpire crew made a decision that sent a shockwave through the stadium. The Rockies coach involved in the incident was ejected immediately. No warning. No delay. Just a direct, firm removal from the game. The reaction was instant. Boos erupted from the crowd. Players stopped arguing and simply watched. The coach, visibly frustrated, continued exchanging words as he was escorted away, but the decision had already been finalized. The message from the umpiring crew was clear: whatever was said had crossed a line that could not be ignored. But even after the ejection, the atmosphere didn't settle. In fact, it intensified. Because now the question wasn't just about what happened. It was about why it happened. And whether this was an isolated moment of frustration or something deeper. Ohtani finally began walking back toward the dugout, and as he did, cameras followed every step. His expression remained controlled, but his teammates gathered around him immediately. Not in anger anymore, but in support. That shift mattered. It turned the moment from confrontation into unity. The Dodgers weren't just reacting to an insult anymore, they were responding as a team that felt its leader had been disrespected. Across the field, the Rockies' dugout remained tense. Coaches avoided eye contact with the field. Players looked frustrated, not just because of the ejection, but because of what the moment meant for the rest of the game. Baseball games are long, emotional, and mentally exhausting. One incident like this can change everything: pitch selection, aggressiveness, focus, everything becomes different. And it did. The game resumed, but it was no longer the same game. Every pitch carried extra weight. Every at-bat felt heavier. The tension didn't disappear, it spread. Fans sensed it immediately. Broadcasters adjusted their tone. Social media exploded within minutes, trying to confirm exactly what had been said inside the dugout. And in situations like this, speculation often moves faster than facts. But one thing was already undeniable. Shohei Ohtani had been at the center of an incident that went far beyond baseball. As the innings continued, attention slowly shifted back to the field, but the emotional impact remained in the background. Ohtani continued playing, focused as always, refusing to let the situation pull him out of his rhythm. That alone became a storyline. Because players at his level are constantly judged not just by performance, but by composure. And in moments like this, composure becomes part of greatness. Meanwhile, the broadcasters began carefully discussing the implications. Not repeating the alleged comment, but addressing the seriousness of the ejection. Former players on television panels began weighing in almost immediately. Some called it unacceptable. Others emphasized the importance of maintaining respect in the game. But nobody dismissed it. Everyone recognized that something significant had happened. Inside the Rockies organization, silence began to replace conversation. Coaches who were present during the incident were reportedly in discussions with team officials. The coach who was ejected had already become the center of attention, not for a baseball decision, but for behavior that now carried consequences far beyond the game itself. For the Dodgers, the emotional tone was different. There was frustration, yes, but also focus. Teams often rally around moments like this, not through retaliation, but through performance. And that's exactly what began to happen. Pitching became sharper. Defense tightened. Energy increased. It wasn't revenge. It was a response. Ohtani, meanwhile, remained steady throughout it all. He didn't escalate the situation. He didn't feed into the chaos. Instead, he continued doing what he always does, playing the game at the highest level possible. That quiet response became one of the most powerful parts of the entire night. As the game moved toward its final innings, it was clear that the incident would not stay confined to the stadium. Reporters were already preparing questions. Cameras were already waiting outside clubhouses. And league officials would almost certainly review what had happened from multiple angles. Because Major League Baseball has always positioned itself as a league built on respect. And when an incident like this happens involving one of the sport's biggest global icons, it doesn't remain local. It became international news. By the time the final out was recorded, the baseball part of the game was almost secondary. The real story had already been written in the dugout. A coach had been ejected. A superstar had been targeted with words that sparked outrage. And an entire stadium had witnessed a moment that reminded everyone how quickly emotions can turn a game into something much bigger. In the post-game silence, players from both teams moved through the routine interviews, but the focus was obvious. Most questions were not about hits, pitches, or defensive plays. They were about the incident. About what was said. About why it happened. About what happens next. And somewhere in the middle of all those questions, one truth stood out above everything else. Shohei Ohtani had once again found himself at the center of a moment that went far beyond baseball. Not because he asked for it. Not because he reacted to it. But because in today's game, his presence is so large that even the smallest incident involving him becomes a defining moment. Whether the league issues further punishment, whether apologies are made, whether explanations come later, all of that remains to be seen. But what cannot be undone is what happened inside that dugout. A line was crossed. A coach was ejected. And baseball was forced once again to confront how fragile respect can become when emotions take over a game played under the brightest lights in sports. And as the cameras finally stopped rolling that night, one question lingered in the air long after the crowd had left the stadium. If this is what happens in one moment of frustration, what comes next the next time tensions rise when Shohei Ohtani is on the field?